you so much for joining me on the Creative Awakening Now podcast. I'm your host, David Matters, and I'm here to bring you stories, interviews, and insights relating to the topics of creativity, inspiration, and practice. My intention is to connect with other people who employ a heart-centered approach to the artistic process and to share this profoundly inspiring content with anyone who cares to hear it. I hope you enjoy. This is a dream, and a dream is never the same. My guest this week was Alexander Caruso. Alexander lives in the hills north of Asheville, North Carolina. In music and everything else, he values imagination and a certain reverence for life and mystery. His musical style is heavily influenced by Eastern sounds and themes, a delay pedal, and a variety of myths and legends. He spends a lot of time in the recording studio, but also enjoys improvising for different types of dance, performance, and events. And this interview is really great because I just recently made friends with Alexander just through a musical connection, and we got talking, and we just have such similar stories in certain ways, but his is also very interesting and unique. And just the more we talked, the more I was like, all right, yeah, we got to have an interview. We got to do this. So we got together at his house, and a lovely rainy day up in the mountains, and we just talked about his creative path and getting into music and just his travels and journey and like how that all influenced him, and fatherhood, and just all the good stuff that usually goes into these episodes. So I know you guys are gonna love it. It was really nice to touch on some of these things with somebody who's so compatible, and not just compatible as far as myself, but with this show in general. Like a lot of the things that I like to touch on, we went right into and went deep into. Had a nice long chat. So definitely, I think you're going to really enjoy it. And there's some music involved as well. What you hear now is obviously Alexander, and there's also going to be a full track at the end. So stick around and listen to that. Some of his new music that he's recently created. And we are actually playing a show together at the Om Sanctuary, July 11th here in Asheville. So if you guys are interested, definitely come check that out. We'll probably do some collaborating and also some individual stuff, and it's gonna be cool. We have a nice blend of music together, so it's definitely gonna be a good show. So I hope you'll check that out. Check out his website and everything else he's got going on. He's created music videos, and he's got a whole bunch of cool stuff up on his website and everything. I'll have the links in the show notes here. So yeah, definitely check that out. Reach out, connect with me if you want to check out any of my music or what I have going on with my other creative outlets. Go to Creative Awakening Now and check that out. My band is called Life Like Water. We've got a lot of stuff going on locally here in Asheville. So yeah, I hope you'll look into that stuff and connect with me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram, Creative Awakening Now. All that usual stuff. I don't want to keep rambling here. I always do, and I always say I'm not gonna, but that's what I do. So anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. These episodes are being a little more sparse through the summer. I'm just so insanely busy. I can't keep up with the every week schedule I was doing. But the interviews are gonna continue coming, and they're always awesome. I keep meeting amazing people and having great interviews. So even though they won't be as consistent, they will definitely not lack in their content. So yeah, hope you all are well. Hope to hear from you soon. Hope to see you out on the dance floor. Be well. Much love. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and thank you so much for having me over today.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, totally. So, I always kind of start these interviews off, asking people about their creative journey, like what brought you to your creative path. For you, obviously, it's largely music, but you do a lot of other stuff too. Where in your childhood did you kind of touch on that, and when did you see it kind of take over, and how did that affect you and bring you to where you are now.
So sort of my creative origin story of sorts. Okay.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Gosh, it's hard to put a finger on any specific time or incident, and I think what's interesting about that question is that the thing that compelled me to be creative as a child is kind of something I really focus on maintaining right now, which is I don't really have a reason for it. I'm not trying to accomplish anything. It's people have asked. I don't know. Do you ever listen to like NPR, the musical critiques and stuff? People are like, well, I wanted to make a song about Hungarian cabinet making and the plight of the this and that, and that's and I've always kind of imagined what I would say if someone asked me that same question, and when people do, it's like I'm like, what comes to mind is like, okay, well, why do I make music? It's like, why do I love? It's because it's my nature to love, but there's no reason for it ultimately, and I just know that it's like my nature compels me to make things. That's why I love doing it. And so, as a child, I wasn't particularly introspective or, philosophical or anything. I make comic books.
You made comic books?
Yeah, I had I had this one sort of main character. His name was Jester. He's kind of like a Spider-Man, I guess. And he had this giant spear, and he'd rip up guys with mohawks and stuff like that.
Naturally.
So, but I don't have a real strong intellectual reason for doing what I do. In other words, it's not like a utilitarian endeavor for me. I'm not, even though of course I hope that it's healing for others, and I hope that it benefits others. I think if that were my goal, then it wouldn't have the particular flavor that it does have, which is kind of, I feel like I kind of go for a more childlike, imaginative quality with what I do.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers your question, but that feels about as close to the truth as I could say about my own kind of intentions and the path that sort of brought me to where I am now. Because it's, like, why does the bee buzz? You can answer that, then you can understand why I make music. So.
Well, and even you saying, like, I wasn't particularly philosophical or poetic as a child, but that answer is quite philosophical and poetic even. I mean, I don't think people look at creativity like that a lot, to not have a set intention or to not have a goal in mind or any particular direction. It's just of your nature. To recognize that it's your nature is, it's unique in a way. I think people discover it at some point, usually, when you can't stop doing it. But if you recognize that, at a young age, that's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, looking back now, I can articulate sort of my, what I was, why, or the how and the when and all of that. But back then I was just flopping through my life like every other kid.
Yeah.
I just did what I did, and there was so much joy in it, and so but if you ask me, like what inspires me, that's something I can give you a more tangible answer for. I mean, I don't know if you've read The Silmarillion by Tolkien.
No.
It's kind of the, there's the Lord of the Rings happened in the Third Age, and the Silmarillion is sort of the creation story of Middle Earth and Arda, which is sort of the whole world that takes place within. And there's this, basically the way it starts out is there's the one who sort of brought it to being the seven, and then he bid them to sing before him, and he said, okay, I want you to just create a song. And they went through 3 movements of music, and then he said, okay, come with me, I'm going to show you what you've created with your song. And it was this world. And then the 7 descended into the world, and as kind of the form in the forms of elements, like the wind and earth and fire and light and the living creatures and whatnot. And there's one his name is Olmo, Aule, who's the god of the basins of the oceans and the mountains and everything. And the thing I always remember that I read this as a child was that he would make something and he would completely forget about it and move on to the next thing, because it was his delight. Just the process of making was his delight, not the fruit of his labor. But his joy was actually in the making in and of itself. And so he just would go from one thing to the next, just total, the very embodiment of being prolific and childlike in his creative, capacities. So I always, as an adult, I see that as sort of my I guess my goal, or my practice, is something to keep me in that space of doing it for its own sake. Just because it's an enjoyable thing to do, from a place of joy and concentration, and flow state. Those are all things I like to cultivate. The meditation practice, I think, really informs the creative process for that reason. It helps you access that state where you're not goal-oriented. You're very much in the midst, you're absorbed with what you're doing. You're absorbed in the process of what you're doing. And to me, that's just like the very best thing about being alive, is when you're in that state. This world can be so utilitarian about everything, and when you can step out of that place, you're just here, doing what you're doing, and let go of all the kind of sort of concepts of reward and intention. And you kind of, I think you touch upon kind of a timeless, intimate place with yourself, and that's when you're at your best. That's when you're most effective as an artist. And so I try to cultivate that. You know what I mean? When I put my music out, that's kind of the challenge, because it sort of shifts into this place where, okay, now I start to, even though it happens maybe subconsciously at first, I want people to like it. I want people to like me, and then it turns into this sort of, edifice of myself. And the more, I think, the older I get, the more difficult it is to let that go completely. But it's still my desire to not, create from a place where I want my mother to finally love me.
Yeah. It's good to get past that at some point.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do.
Or to be, to find acceptance from people that I admire and whatnot. It's, we all have that kind of animal need to find approval. I think it really gets in the way, of making cool stuff sometimes. If you're,
and being genuine with it.
Yeah.
Not seeking other people's approval.
Yeah.
But as you say all this, we're sitting here in this beautiful room that you built, and listening to the rainfall, and there's this sweet little kitten here being caressed by this big giant other cat. And it's just this perfect, lovely little abode to speak about what you're saying. You kind of, a lot of your presence holds that. Since I've known you, and hearing your music and stuff, you definitely embody that in a way that you're talking about it very freely, and very this is just what I do, And I'm curious, at what point did that turn into actual practice for you, musically, especially? Where did you take this imaginative, creative energy and focus it into specifically music?
Into recording?
Or playing.
When I was 16 and whatnot, I got into a couple of bands and things like that, and sort of got in that whole world. But when I was, I was probably 20. I started, I had this whole epiphany where I read this book about, Hung Sure. I read the book about his Dharma ancestor, I guess you would call him, Empty Cloud, or Su Yun. And
shameless plug, he was on the podcast.
Yeah.
So check that episode out.
Perfect plug. But so there's a little connection between, him and myself in that way.
That's awesome.
And, because of, once I read that book, I was, I'd never even heard of Buddhism. I'd never even heard of anything remotely like that. I was in Kansas, I was it was basically like a cultural wasteland, where there's, and this is before the internet, before all that stuff, And so it just, all of a sudden being exposed to something so simple and so profound. It was basically it was his life story, and it's very much like an ancient podcast. They'd be like, okay, tell us about your first year, and he'd be like, okay, year 1, da 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 da. Second chapter was year 2, and then he just went all the way to 120, which is how old he lived to be. And his life story was so inspiring, and it awoke kind of that kind of heroic archetype within myself, where it occurred to me that I could just do whatever the hell I wanted with my life. That, like, literally, this life was going to be over soon, and I could just make it up as I went. And it was, as simple as it sounds, for me, it hit me in such a way that was very, very full-bodied. It was such a powerful moment for me, and I guess chapter in my life that I sold everything I owned, gave up everything, and just hit the road, hitchhiked out west, and then ended up going around the world and whatnot, spending years just traveling around as if this were just a dream that I was living in, and really feeling that in my body, like feeling the freedom of glimpsing the dreamlike nature of this life in a way that only someone who's like innocent can, looking back, I was so naive, but I think it was my naivete that really was kind of my guiding star in a lot of ways. And so, anyway, to answer your question, long story short, I had been doing this for a long time, and my friend I left my electric guitar with my friend, and I came back to get it, and he had sold it to pay rent, and so I just took his acoustic guitar as ransom, and I brought it with me on the next phase of my journeys, and ended up writing all these songs, just like playing. I'd be on the beach, and I just stay up all night making music and whatnot, just by myself, and I just started hearing all these other layers and roots and branches and to the songs, and it really occurred to me that that in order to be effective creatively, I needed something to plug into. I needed to create a little space for myself to create this album that I wanted to make. I had the whole thing mapped out in my mind, and so that's kind of what got me focused. Was after having experienced all that for years and years of not having anything, and sort of kind of grounding into my more kind of wandering mendicant self, it occurred to me that, like, I had polished my tools, but now I wanted to do something with them. It wasn't enough just to bliss out in a chai shop in the Himalayas. That was fun for a while, but I wanted to make something. I wanted to do something tangible. So that's kind of what compelled me to focus my energies towards what I see as a more tangible, three-dimensional life purpose, and focus less on how I felt and more about what I was doing with my whatever potentials that I did have.
All that you had already cultivated, expressing that and putting it into something that you could share with people. And we talked about this already, because that was such a crazy connection that we had, that, like, we have such similar journeys where I did the same thing, took off, started hitchhiking around, getting silly, and, like, just being so naive but so free, and that sense of freedom, like you said, being the guiding star. Like, looking back at it, you're like, God, I was so crazy, reckless, and careless, and selfish, all those things. But at the same time, it is what makes you what you are, and all the people that I meet who have had similar experiences, and I find myself meeting more and more of them all the time. At one time, I felt like I was doing this crazy thing that no one else did. I was from rural Pennsylvania. Nobody even knew what hitchhiking was, thought it was crazy, me leaving. And then slowly over the years, I find, like, my tribe, this people who all did the same things, and, like, got fed up with what they were doing, wanted something more, and followed their passion and did it and learned from it, and hopefully survived, which not everyone does.
Not all of them did.
Not all of them do. And I have sad stories about that.
Yeah,
people
me too.
who haven't survived, but I so see, that what you're saying, you know, like that feeling of that, like, all right, now what? Like, I'm doing all this amazing stuff and seeing all this beauty and being spontaneous and free, but now what? You know, now it's like,
Yeah.
how do you share that? How do you express it?
And I think, there's a time and a place, especially when you're in your early 20s. I think it's a good time. You're not a boy anymore, but you're not quite a man. You're like kind of, it's like a time to sort of wire your mind sort of around a few real basic principles. One of them being that everything is actually okay. That's a hard thing to really understand in this world where, but when you surrender to kind of the stream, of whatever the moment or wherever it takes you, and you find over and over again that you're taken care of somehow, that somehow things just have a way of working out, you start to really kind of orient yourself around the idea that everything is going to be okay. And for me, this massive weight left my shoulder, of all the expectations that were placed on me throughout my life. It occurred to me that I was going to die, and that I didn't have much time, and that everything was actually okay.
Yeah.
Life wasn't this giant obstacle course. It was this amazing opportunity to experience, what there is to experience here, which is, majestically beautiful and profound and incomprehensibly deep but that's the thing, is like there's a time to like really do that, and then the trick is knowing when the next chapter comes, being able to jump on that and become an effective person in this world,
be able to integrate it.
Because not to criticize others, I think everyone has a really, specific sort of way that they do things. Some paths can be more circuitous than others, but I think that there's this kind of, especially in kind of the yoga worlds, the New Age worlds, and there's this sort of emphasis on like trying to kind of always be in a certain mind state, like cultivating this really great state of consciousness, this really high state of consciousness. And you can kind of get obsessed with the food that you eat and the places that you live, go from one bliss bubble to the next, like Hawaii to the Himalayas to Boulder, Colorado, or Santa Cruz. All these places are sort of these little bliss bubbles where people converge and bliss out together and try to change the world by having costume parties and not really part of the larger conversation. There's not a lot of, to me at least, I haven't noticed a lot of real effective waves coming out of that whole way of life. There's a lot of cool
hard
ideas.
to measure it. It's hard to quantify, but it is obvious when you sit down one-on-one with somebody, you strip all that away, and they can't find that peace. They can't find that happiness. If that's where they sit, then it's pretty obvious that all that running around is really not doing a whole lot.
Yeah, and it's more like, the reason I say it is because it's like, I think you get obsessed with it's easy to become self-obsessed in that life. I mean, I know I was.
Oh yeah.
Like I was just like all about whatever next amazing thing I was, But then as I think you get older, you realize that, to truly be happy, you have to live with a sense of purpose that involves, you have to kind of expand your sense of self to include others more and more. And I think that's kind of one of the defining watermarks of growing up, is the larger your sense of self that encompasses other people is, the more mature you actually are in this world. And so that ties into a need to have a purpose and a need to have something to do in this three-dimensional reality, in the world that we live in, that other people can, benefit from on some level at least, or at least share something. And for me, the first step was having a child. And I always knew I wanted to have a child. And so that was, when I met my partner at the time, and it just occurred to us that's what we wanted to do, and it was very intentional, and that was kind of my initiation into adulthood for the first time. And a lot of the concepts of the greater sense of purpose, were kind of germinated in fatherhood for me. They became real, and because I was forced to take care of and to expand my sense of self to include this child and the person that I was raising the child with. So.
Can you talk about that in regards to, if you got, I don't want to cut you
No,
off on
that's
it,
good.
but I wanted to ask you this anyway. I'm always so curious, being a father and a creative person myself. It's like we want to integrate all those lessons, like we were saying, like learning from the road and taking it into adulthood and like applying it to do something to benefit the world, or if you could say that.
Mm-hmm.
But going into parenting, I find it to be by far the most challenging situation you can find yourself in, to remain, an autonomous individual, to still have that spark, to be creative, to be expressive, but also to extend that to, this child that you're raising. Like, do you have anything that you want to share about that? Like, just infusing that creative energy into parenting. Like, I find it such a fascinating topic.
Yeah, well, if you listen to my music pre-child and compare it to the music post-child, there's a lot more, there's a lot less transcendent thematic qualities in the post-child world. Pre-child world was very, very much, very etheric, very, kind of beyond, and a lot more emotion became infused in my music. Because, as every parent knows, as is the most cliche thing about parenting that you could possibly say, but yet the most profound thing I've ever experienced nonetheless, when you meet your child, you understand love for the first time. And, it just opened up my emotional self to such a, to such a larger capacity that I could have conceived of before. And I think of, when I think of music, I think, there's like the three pillars of music. This is like sort of my own philosophy sort of orients around these sort of three main concepts, which is, you have as a musician, you have your technique and your chops, your skill, and you have the imaginative aspect, the creative aspect, but the part you get that's really informed by having a child, if you do it right, not everyone, I think, maybe experiences what I experienced. I can't say for sure, but for me, the third part really came into focus, which is the emotional depth to what you're doing. Like the soul behind, which is probably the most important part. They're all three essential aspects of music, and they all kind of, if you have all three, I think you're doing something really amazing. There's a lot of people who have two.
Yeah, for sure.
Like got great technique, great imagination, but maybe it's a little dry or whatever. You could, any of those two combinations together are still good. They can make good music. But those three together, I think make, at least my favorite music strongly represents each of those things and is strongly balanced between those three things. And so I think having a child for me, and of course the imaginative element. Every night as my daughter and I were going to sleep, I'd tell her a story and I'd just make it up. We'd make it up together sometimes. She'd be like, "What?" I'd ask Violet, I'd be like, "Okay, what happens next?" She goes, "Well, okay, maybe the elf creates a rainbow and slides down off the shamrock from the rainbow into this pond, and then I'll take it from there, just kind of exercising the imaginative muscle a lot when you're with your child, because they're just unlimited in their creativity, and not just their creativity, but their almost shamanic ability to exist in the imagination. To them, it's utterly real. So they're like, one of the things I did, when I was raising my child, is I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with her. And I create these elaborate worlds, and she would have her character. I don't know if you're familiar with how role-playing games work.
I'm not really.
It's something I grew up with a lot.
Enlighten me.
But basically the concept is you create kind of an alter ego or persona, and there's the person who embodies the persona, and there's the person who's called the dungeon master, who takes that person on a quest of some kind or into a world of some sort. And they go on various adventures, and the dungeon master's role is to create the world, but also to kind of calculate probabilities of success for the things they want to do. And so you use dice sometimes, like, okay, your character's strong, maybe he can do this or she can do this, or if she's fast, maybe she can do this or that, but so And it's really fun, especially for kids, because kids can be so embodied in their imagination.
Yeah.
And so I would do a lot of that with her. We created this whole giant world, and for 3 years, like, you know, every night before, like after dinner, we play. And the world became very elaborate, and it involved some of her friends when they'd come over. You know, they would be in it and everything. And so there's lots of imaginative outlets. It doesn't really help technique much, though.
Yeah.
Having a child,
No.
because that takes time, and you know, your time, I think, really can get pointed elsewhere in the other child.
Definitely. But that's where discipline, practice, and all that converge, and
Getting up early.
yeah,
all those
that's it.
things.
Or staying up late, whatever works. You know,
Whatever it takes. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. You know, exercising the imaginative muscles, and you know, having, for people who don't have kids, you know, obviously it's easy to see a kid and be like, wow, they got some imagination. They could just make up this game. You know, they could just exist. You know, but when you're really around it all the time, and if they're not like sucked into a phone or some kind of device where it's just shut off, you know, which is always sad to see, though it happens, it's so inspiring. Like being around kids and hanging out with them.
Yeah.
Like my daughter, so often, she, just her state of mind and her energy, like what, you know, we were just hanging outside on the back porch today. It was raining, and we were just being silly, you know, like just like wrestling and like doing whatever, and somehow she would come up with this whole thing about what we're doing and how it's going to go and what, you know, what's going to come after it, you know, and that is really inspiring for me. Like I'll take that if I'm in the right mind state, you know, not always, but if I'm in the right mind state, I'll take that and absorb it, and I can almost tap back into that childish way, you know?
Yeah, if your mind's soft enough, it can be really intoxicating, you know, because you get like a contact. It's almost like, you know how you walk into a room and like say there's a master there or something. The way our bodies and minds work is we kind of, you know, it's all vibration, and we sort of attune ourselves to the strongest vibration in the room often. That's, you know, we empathetically kind of harmonize with one another, you know, when we hold space, and it all happens on a kind of pre-mind vibrational level. Well, when a child's really, when your mind is soft enough to kind of enter into that space with a child, their vibration, the imagination of what they're doing is so powerful because they're so embodied, and they literally feel everything, and that they're imagining. They're you know, they got like 1 foot in that world completely. It's easier to kind of ride that vibration with them, to ride into that world with them. They can be a real gateway. Oh yeah. And
if you're able to.
Yeah, if your mind's soft enough and you got the energy and you're not exhausted from like
a full day of work and everything else in life, paying bills, and it's tricky. It really is tricky. And the more you get into it, the more you're used to it, and so you kind of overlook it, you know, or like get irritated by it, and it's a shame. And I mean, that's just life, you know. It's just what it is. But I'm so grateful in those moments where I let go and I open it up, you know, and I just like, you know, my favorite thing is going out in the woods with Zara, my daughter, or going down to the river or something, you know, and like we'll sit there, and my favorite thing that we started doing is we make this, like, we call it earth art, where we just take like pine cones and sticks and flowers, and we'll make little mandalas, or we'll build little like forts, you know, or whatever, and she'll make little fairy houses and things.
Fairy houses, that's a thing.
We can spend hours in the woods, and she won't have a single complaint. You know, she won't have anything to argue about. You know, like at home it could be 5 minutes and she's bored.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to do this. I want to watch a movie. You know, but when we're out in nature, like it's so easy to get like sink into it. And when I'm with her in that place, I fall right into it with her, and it's so special.
Well, how about this though? And you can be honest here, okay? Like, okay. How about the more torturous versions of that? Like, have you ever had to play Pony Hospital with your daughter? She's like, oh no! Looks like the pony broke his hoof. We have to get out the masking tape.
Plenty.
Yeah, dude, that stuff can be like hell on earth sometimes. It's like, you want to pass out.
But yes, there is that. There's
I don't want to make it sound like it's all this, like, you know, beautiful bliss ride into the imaginative realms.
It's good to put the perspective in there.
I don't ever want to play Pony Hospital again.
There are worse ones even than that, and I find myself at this point, because she's 5, my daughter, and the way that the world is now with distraction, like it's so easy. Like she goes to school, she has a whole day where she's absorbed in learning and things like that. She comes home, she's exhausted, and she wants to watch a movie or something. And it's so easy for me after a full day of work and being wrecked. And
like, okay,
gotta make dinner. Yeah, it's like, fine, do it, please, just relax. Let me be for a minute. And like, that's when there's this like moral dilemma going on where it's like, life is just so complex. You got to take it. You have to take it just like you have to take Pony Hospital sometimes. And,
gotta play Pony Hospital.
Yeah, but if you indulge enough, like I feel like those moments are so powerful, even when they are like the painful ones on the side, because they open up for so much more. If we just like, no, just go watch a movie. Just leave me alone. I need to rest. If we do that too much, it feels like it like strains their imagination, it puts stress on it.
Not just that, but you're missing out on this like amazing opportunity. I mean, your child's not going to be a child for very long. I mean, I just went to my daughter's today. I went to her 7th grade graduation. And I mean, she's like a little woman now. Very little interest in playing anything, even Pony Hospital, So, and I look back and I'm like, did I make the most of my time? I really, to me, it's you have to see it as an opportunity to connect with the most important person at the most important time of their life, and see it as a practice in and of itself. It's easy to take. That's maybe one of the most challenging and sad, tragic aspects of being alive in the time that we're in. Is there's so many easy ways out.
Yeah.
There's so many easy ways to disengage from this moment. This is where the learning is happening. This is where life is happening.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to check out now. Like there's where you look, there's a doorway to some kind of lesser version of this moment.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most difficult things to not only overcome but to express and to embody. And like boredom. Even a generation before, even when I was a kid, boredom was kind of just like part of the territory. Yeah. Like Saturday, summer vacation, like you watched enough movies. My parents were like, get outside. Stay outside. Do something for the next 5 hours and don't bug me. Like entertain yourself. And that was just part of my childhood. And that was only, I'm 32. My parents' generation, it was probably a whole lot more boredom. Their parents' generation probably, exponential amount. But our kids especially, like, the level of distraction available to where you don't even have to experience boredom. You just flip on a movie and you can watch all day, show after show after show. And, if not that, then you can play your game on your phone, or you can, hang out with your friends on the internet, or whatever it is. Like, I feel like distraction it is kind of like an epidemic where it's like,
yeah, and it's like there's a part of ourselves, part of our being that needs to constantly be tonified in order to be effective and strong. And that's the very thing that gets weakened by having unlimited options all the time. Like being able to just keep scrolling down or click on the next thing. It creates a kind of this endemic of low attention span.
It does.
And
creativity suffers, I think, when like the more, and there's studies that show, and I love, like when I look into this stuff, where it's like more restrictions on outlets, like say, music or art or whatever, like generally when people have less access to things, they're more creative. If you have unlimited access to whatever you want, like the internet, all these instruments, you have all the money to do anything you want, like there's studies that show like you tend to be less creative because of that. You're like overwhelmed with the options.
You get kind of flaccid because everything's too easy.
Exactly. But when there's all these constraints on you, you have your one guitar and it only has 5 strings, and you're out in the woods for a week by yourself. Like you're gonna figure it out. You're gonna search because there's nothing else. There's no distractions.
It's so true.
And those moments are powerful too.
It's like this experiment that we're in the midst of right now, and I just feel concerned about, kind of the end game of this experiment where life becomes less and less. I mean, because if you think about the way our bodies work, the way everything in this world works, is that this earth demands that we be strong.
Mm.
The earth weeds out the weak, and there's a reason why this three-dimensional reality isn't just this kind of easy sort of angelic realm.
Mm-hmm.
It's because to like really tap into the deeper layers of reality, it requires a certain kind of focus. It requires a certain kind of determination, a certain kind of steadiness, and if you think about, like you don't exercise your body, it gets weak. If you don't exercise, if you don't read much or whatever, you don't use your imagination, it gets weak. Anything will get weak unless you use it. And so not having to kind of be resourceful, rather than having all this shit spoon-fed to you all the time. Like here's another form of entertainment. Here's that steals your own internal reservoir of resourcefulness, like when you can draw from your own strength. And yes, doom and gloom.
Doom and gloom. No, but I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think that just talking about it is important. Getting it out there, and I do feel like even a podcast like this, where we're just sitting and having a conversation for 45 minutes or whatever, like people rarely want to sit and listen to it in its entirety because they don't have the time, first of all, but it's also like just a conversation. It's not that interesting to people anymore.
There's not enough bells and whistles.
Yeah, there's not enough like splices and sound bites and things like that. Like there are people who love it, I love it. Or even reading books, things like that, where it's just like you need to have this attention span for it, where you just let go, unplug, and get into it, and I love having the moments where I'm kind of forced into it, Maybe it's, I usually make that choice, now at this point in my life, where I have to like force myself to like unplug and get away, or take my family away from it, or whatever it is. But it does so much for us. And
and it's your responsibility, because the world, like you said, it's a confusing place. It's never been this confusing. Our animal selves don't quite know how to resist our environment because we never really had to before. And to be afraid of breathing the air, or afraid of this activity. Like everything, once upon a time, the world was, we were utterly adapted to the world that we lived in. And you think about kind of like the way the Native Americans, how they suffered at the hands of this kind of colonial mindset that came in and introduced alcohol. It's like, oh, it's out. We're not afraid of any food in the environment. We're not afraid of any. There's nothing that's really. Well, maybe that's not entirely true. There's probably a lot of poisonous things that they're aware of.
Well, for sure, but it's medicine. Snakes. They had the idea that all poison is also medicine.
Okay, but I don't know. I think there's never been a time in history where we've had to be this wary towards the food that we eat, towards anything really, and so it creates a confusing place for our animals to kind of navigate. We have to make a lot more choices. We have to be really more clever about the choices we make.
And so. I wonder, to steer this back to your music and stuff, how, when I get into these conversations, where it's like, some people like to get really radical, and I used to be really radical, gotta change the system, we gotta do something, like dropping out of society and like protesting and whatever it was, I was on board, living that like kind of anarchist mindset where it was like smash the state, but not that I have any kind of animosity towards that, because I think it has its place, but as I've gotten older, I've felt that animosity in itself, anger in itself, resentment, all those things in itself doesn't do much other than piss you off and get you all flustered, But when you channel it into something, it starts to have a direction, and people can hear you. They're not just seeing you being angry and frustrated. They're seeing like, here's this creative expression. And how do you see that in your music now? And especially in like producing. I mean, like, I'd love to hear you just talk about like how you do your music. You were kind of explaining it to me, like being this process that you have with layering and different things like that to create this soundscape that embodies this feeling, Like, how do you do that in a technical sense?
In a technical sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, usually I'll start with just one. It's like you kind of think about like lighting a little candle in a room, and you illuminate one part of a piece, and then once that part's illuminated, you can sort of imagine, other things that might be connected to it. And in my mind, I'm fairly simple-minded. I think for me, I need to have like something out there before I can really effectively conceive of what might accompany it. And so I just kind of let the process unfolds, like almost like I'm kind of discovering a new country or something, or a world or an idea. It kind of it'll grow its own branches, and then it'll grow its own roots, and it'll have its own little process of unfolding. But my least of all the maybe like composed and recorded like between 150 and 200 songs, and my least favorite ones are the ones where I kind of knew what I was doing in the beginning. Like I had this idea and I put it down.
A concept you're trying to go towards.
It's conceptual.
Yeah.
All my favorite ones were all accidents, just like surprises. And that's kind of, in the beginning of our conversation, I was talking about sort of, accessing flow state. To me, there's things that will reveal themselves. The greater mind reveals itself when your own mind's out of the way. And and things happen that, I don't necessarily want to call it channeling. I don't really I don't so much buy into the kind of the conventional, or at least the new age conventional idea of what channeling is. I think we're all these kind of unlimited creative beings, and when we get out of our own ways, we can be amazed and surprised by the things that we're able to do. And those are all my favorite parts of my, of all the favorite things that I've done have all been like that. Like, wow, I never could have conceived of that beforehand. That thing that just occurred to me in that moment, like everything just kind of crystallizes for a second, and then you see kind of with clarity a deeper window into the world that you're making. And so my process is kind of flying by the seat of my pants,
letting accidents happen and being like, that's cool.
Like there was this one, this is, can I tell a quick story?
Yeah, please.
There's this one song I made, maybe I can send you the loop that I'm talking about, where this is something that still kind of blows me away. I had kind of gotten most of the song finished, and then there was this part at the end where I would just take all my favorite parts of the guitar solo and I'd loop them. And over and over, and then I'd fade one loop in over the other one, and then that one would fade out, and then I'd fade another one in, and I just had I maybe did that 8 times, and that was kind of the ending, and I kept turning up the reverb, so it get bigger and bigger and bigger, and I had my headphones on, and I was listening to this one part where these 2 loops converged, and I could hear, and this is the honest truth, I could hear my voice, even though I didn't sing or anything, my voice saying Jai Radhe, which is this Sanskrit. It's Sanskrit for Hail Radhe, who's the female consort of Krishna, kind of the embodiment of love. I could hear my voice saying Jai Radhe by all the microtones that were created, all these clashing microtones and these converging loops, like things like that happened. And so what I did was I took that part and I just kind of sang over it to kind of emphasize it, because I mean, if I had to listen really deeply into it to hear it. Listening to it on like a regular sound system, you wouldn't hear it. No one else would hear it but me. So I just gently sang over it and emphasized the part so that you could hear it. So that's like an example of what I mean. It's like this kind of random things happen. And
I love that, man. That's my favorite thing about writing, is like, because I'm so into melodies and stuff, and when I write music, I'll play a melody and it'll feel good, like, oh, that's cool, but if it doesn't say anything to me, if it doesn't like speak in a certain way, I don't want to pursue it, so I keep working on it. And sometimes, just by messing around and playing, I'll come upon it and I'll hear it, like just like you're saying, I'll hear a line and it's singing through those musical notes in that way, and nobody else would hear it, obviously. It's your intuition and your imagination connecting with it in that personal way that only you can with your music, But when you hear it, you can emphasize it, and other people start to hear it.
Yeah,
and,
you kind of point it out.
Yeah, and that's what gets really exciting with music, because I think that once you've heard it well enough, you're able to express it well enough for other people to hear it. And that's what makes. Sometimes art in general can seem really selfish. It can really seem like, this is my thing. This is about me. But when you break that layer and you kind of get into that space, that's when it becomes like this communal access. When you're in a room with people and you hear a song come on, and all of a sudden everyone's like, everybody feels the same little groove to it, whatever it is.
So there's a shared reality for a while.
Yeah. Especially like dance music. It's always fun when you go to a concert and like the band stops, but then the house music comes on, and like if it sucks, everybody knows it sucks, and everyone goes to the bar or the bathroom. But sometimes like the right song comes on in between, and everyone keeps dancing, like the band didn't even stop. Like those are really special moments, I feel like, because in and of itself, nobody would be out there on the dance floor getting down. Like they came to see live music, but because that energy's there and you're all sharing it collectively, dancing in general, like if you feel that beat, all of a sudden your toes starts tapping, hips start moving, like there's this like communal energy to it that's really special.
Yeah, and it's, saying that kind of taps into this. One of the things I've been studying lately is this kind of idea of kind of embodied mythology and sort of processing my own grief and other emotions in the mythological kind of framework. And the reason that I feel like that intersects with what you're saying is what I've learned through that is that, it's almost like, okay, say, like you take the idea of bread, right? Or food. When you break bread with someone else, there's this primal rightness to it, because, our civilization, that's what the very root of civilization is, shared resources. That's how it all began, as we all like realize that we're much more effective when we work together. And so the very first probably connection to having a larger sense of self and tribe was around food. And similarly with music, it's like that. There's like that's also something that was very early on, is when you have a shared sense of reality and cohesion with someone else in a group or whatnot. And that's the power of music. There's this primal rightness to it. I can't say exactly, like on a biological level what's happening, but it's, for us, there's like this sense of safety and a shared reality with other beings, because we've learned, over hundreds of thousands of years, that being in communion with others is kind of the point.
Yeah.
And it enhances your own life experience, and your capacity to survive in this world is much greater when you're in communion with others.
Yeah.
And so our animal selves are so locked into that truth that music brings us to this place of like, oh yeah, we're in this shared reality. This is good. This is right.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's why there's always music and food. Anytime there's a celebration, or there's mourning, or there's growth or progress, or coming home or leaving, like they're always accompanied by those things, and dancing.
Yeah, and that's similarly with myth, is that like in stories, it gives your own emotions a sense of shared reality with others. It's like a larger context for your own story, because you see it played out in the stories, in the existing stories. It's like makes you feel like you're part of something larger that's happening, and you're not just the only person experiencing this. I had this experience, we talk about fatherhood, where I was like walking with my daughter one day. I was walking her up to school, and in front of me there were all these other parents walking their kids, and it was like the most mundane thing in the world. But I just had this, I wouldn't say a vision per se, but I had this just moment of like deep chiming of truth of how profound this experience was. Not because it's more profound than anything else, because it's like the shared, I've like done the same, like millions and millions of people and living beings have done this before me. And here I am, I have this child, I'm taking care of this child, I'm walking her, and I'm like protecting her. Just like millions and millions and millions of living beings have done before me, and I'm like on the forefront of that experience right now. Like I'm on the cresting wave of life, creating life and stewarding life. And as commonplace as it is, it's like, to me, it's the most, it was one of the most potent experiences in my life.
Totally.
To feel the truth of, that and its simplicity and its rightness,
It's so simple, and it's like, I don't remember where I heard it, or maybe I never heard it anywhere, but I felt it. The idea of profundity or like epiphany, it's not about the situation. It's never about the situation. It's about like recognition. It's about like noticing it in yourself. Like the situation can be completely mundane, like you said, walking with your kid to school, like everyone does every single day as a parent. But it's when you're in the right mind state to recognize the actual, how profound it is, to recognize it in a felt experience beyond just like a concept or beyond just like a thing to do, and that I think that ties into really everything. It's just like, why do you connect with something? Why do you connect with music? Why do you connect with art? Why do you connect with poetry? Whatever it is, like sometimes it just hits you. I remember the first time that I read poetry when I was a kid, and I read tons of poetry before, just in school or whatever. It meant nothing to me. But I remember the first time that I read something that like really sunk deep, and it changed everything.
Do you remember what it was?
Well, I remember the one, Jack Kerouac was the very first person that introduced me to like what I saw as like good poetry. But it was before him. It was, man, who was it? I can't even remember, honestly. I was really young, and I remember coming upon, it could have been like Robert Frost or something, like something simple, like something not deep at all, but it was just, I read these couple of lines, and it summed up something so deep in me that I had never seen put into words before, put in so eloquently. And that kind of like shook me in this way where I was like, wow, like, how do you say that and make it mean so much when anyone else could say it so many different ways and it means nothing?
Yeah.
And then later in life is when I really put it together, and I started reading Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, and the Beat Poets really did it for me, about like traveling and stuff. And even more than that was actually when I discovered like Zen poetry, haiku, and different things like that. Was when I could read a line, it was like four lines, like, a handful of words, but they're put in such a way that just bore deep into me,
Yeah.
Those kind of things. And music's the same way. I mean, what is it? What is it you recognize suddenly that is so deep and so profound, but it was at the same time commonplace? You hear music on the radio every day.
That's a wonderful, like, we could talk for an hour just about that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, why do we love music? Like, why do certain things sound beautiful and other things sound terrible? Where do those biases come from? And they're so universal. How, we share those biases. And I could talk all day. That's like one of my favorite things. It's like because in a lot of ways as an artist, that's what I feel like we cultivate, is we kind of develop an acute sense of beauty. Like we really become sensitive to, because we sit and mull over and massage the details of our own creation so much that we like learn to take out what's not in harmony. We learn to take out what's not essential, and strip away all the kind of rough stuff and leave just like the purity of our creation there. So you kind of develop this acute perception of beauty. But the deeper question is, why do we think this is beauty?
Yeah.
And I really, to sum it up, if I may be so presumptuous as to pretend that I understand, is I really feel like, like you look in the world, like, why do we think nature is so beautiful? We see something that is serving life. We see something that's existence is facilitating more life. And I think at the very core of all living beings is that impetus to live. And so anything that serves life, anything that makes life possible and better is beautiful to us. Because there is, like you look at so many things in the natural world and you see a certain, I wouldn't say a symmetry to it, but there's like a sense of harmony to its existence.
Mm.
It's working symbiotically, and it's even you can see it with your eyes in its structures, in its physicality. You see harmony. You see things that support, that support the world around it, that make the world around it a better place, as opposed to the things that we don't find beautiful, like rotting, death, imbalance, industry, things that seem to suppress or destroy the possibility of life, become less and less beautiful. And that's, if you think about like disharmony, things that don't work together, sounds that don't work together, we don't like, like we don't like dissonant notes and chords that don't make sense and don't have like a sense of balance and proportion and musicality. And it's the same reason when we're out and we don't like seeing something that's completely choked with weeds, like a beautiful native plant being choked out by an invasive species or something. There's like so many different ways that this plays out in the natural world, but I think that's where we derive our sense of beauty, is because at our nature, our greatest impulse is to serve and forward life. And so anything that represents a sense of harmony, what that means to us. And I think a lot of it is very universal, because as people throughout the world, there's very universal characteristics of what harmony on the earth looks like, even if, they're the same from one side of the planet to the next.
Yeah, for sure.
Not to say that everyone's is the same, but there's certain core similarities between people. It's like that's what Jung talks about with the archetypes. Exact same concept. There's these sort of shared experiences we all have with as humans at a root level that unite us. Certain shared symbols that are true throughout different cultures and whatnot.
We
and
identify with them.
And beauty is its own. It's its own archetype in that way. We have similar concepts of beauty because we have a similar life experience, and we're all part of that same impulse to live. And anyway,
yeah,
I could go on and on. I really feel there's just so much, such a ripe place of discovery.
Definitely
is in the concept of beauty and what it means. And
I love that topic, and I love your answer. It's great, and I fully agree with that. I think it's so simple and yet still so mysterious. Like you can look at it like, oh, it's just geometry. It's just the plants, the trees growing in a certain way is perfectly geometrically proportionate. The Coriolis effect of storms. You cut fruit open and it's got this perfect geometric pattern. Like music is just geometry. Like you can say that, sure. And it's really simple to say, like, yes, it's just mathematics. Like lots of scientists and physicists have kind of been saying that for a long time, but it doesn't have the feeling of like recognizing it in yourself. Like it's not just seeing something, it's recognizing it in yourself.
I mean, and it also begs the question is, why do we find it attractive at all, though?
Exactly. Well, we are it.
Why do we like the math?
Yeah.
Why do we like the symmetry? And when you cut the fruit open, what happens when you cut a fruit open and it's filled with worms and rot?
Yeah.
It's like, ew, you don't like that.
That's it. I mean,
there's death.
Which is also an interesting topic, because then you start talking about why are we so afraid of death? And it's just as much a part of us. Just as much. Entropy is a major part of the universe.
A necessary aspect of life.
But we're just. I don't think that there's any point of like bantering about it any further. You summed it up very beautifully, and I appreciate that answer. But I think it's such a rich topic that I hope people look into further. And the last podcast I did, actually, if anyone likes this topic, hope they'll go check it out. Danny Ellis. He was one of my teachers, actually, and he lives in Asheville. I don't know if you know of him at all. Fantastic musician and teacher, just an amazing guy. And we had this discussion about this topic too, where it was like, what is it that allows you, even if you think you're a terrible musician, like, how is it that you can recognize something and notice that it's great? Notice that it's beautiful. Notice that it has this like quality to it that is masterful. And his whole thing is like, you can only notice that because there's a piece inside you that is that, and it resonates with you. Otherwise, like, how would you know what's beautiful, what's masterful, what's, perfect in your eyes or whatever? He's talking about like, how do you know when you walk into a grocery store and it's freezing cold? Like, how do you know it's cold? Well, it's because you're warm And there's a part in you that recognizes what warm and cold is, and he summed it up in a really great way. But that's what I love about doing this podcast. Like, all these different streams kind of converge on these topics.
That is how it happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all end up in the same place often,
And I love it.
Just different ways to get there.
Exactly, and everyone's got their own story and their own path for it, and it never loses interest for me. Every time, even if I'm like tired or I have a full day and I gotta go interview somebody, I gotta go drive and do this. Every single time, I walk away from it grateful and like enriched. And I hope people who listen feel that same way, because it's like, it's just real, like digging into the creative sense unpretentiously. We're not sitting here bantering about religion or about what is or isn't good. You're talking about something that is very fundamental to all people, and it's this like passionate drive to create, passionate drive to live fully,
serve life.
Yeah. And it all ties in this really, really beautiful way. But we have been going for a while, and I do want to be mindful about that.
Okay. Can I just follow up to finish answering your question about my own technical process and get into a little more technical aspects? I just want to be clear that you understand that, like, it's not just a vision that happens and then it's there. Like, I massage things forever to get them into the state that, like, I'm constantly like shifting and moving things around and like pulling out aspects to get the final. And it takes like the song that I'm going to share with you. It's called Meta. It's like my newest album. That was probably the hardest song I've ever. It took more work to get that song into the state it's in than I've ever had to do with anything. A lot of it was like massaging the vocals and getting everything, like ripping out whole sections, rebuilding them, ripping that out again. I mean, the process of creation and destruction was just like in full effect over and over and over with this song. And finally I finished it. And it took me probably 6 months just to finish this one track. Wow. So I just wanted, I don't want to make it sound overly romantic. Like I just see this vision and then all of a sudden it's there.
It's there. Just let it happen.
No, that's not how it works. It's so much work. It's so much hard work, and I just wanted to be real about that.
No, I'm glad you said
misrepresent.
That. Yeah, that's an important piece.
Yeah.
Maybe the most essential is that perseverance. You have to have that, like, you have to have the vision. Like you said, you have to have the technique. You have to have the imagination and everything. But you also have to have a willingness to, like, see it through. And to not have expectations that you cling to, it's really, you got to let go of all that and just do it for the process, do it because you love it. I find that to be also an insanely reoccurring topic, is like, you have to really be in it for the sake of creativity, like for nothing more than that. Because if you have, like you were saying, if you have a concept, if you have this idea that you want to see, our preferences are always getting in the way of what can be.
Totally. And that determination you're talking about is like another hour podcast I could do about, because just like in philosophy and mythology and everything else, like those, the real gold, I think, as an artist, as a seeker, as really anything, is inspiration, ultimately. Being inspired to do what you're doing. And so the question often is, for me, is like, how do I stay inspired? Like, I mean, knowledge is great. Knowledge is essential. But if you don't, but most of us know what to do. Like, okay, go sit on a cushion and bring your mind to a place of stillness. You have all the technical knowledge you need right there. Yeah. The rest is like up to your determination to do it. Yeah. And similarly with music or whatever, these kind of really big, ambitious, grueling processes sometimes. If you're not inspired, all the technique and everything else in the world won't do anything for you. So it's like, how do we stay inspired? Yeah. That's such a big question for me. And that's like, if I'm not doing self-care, it really shows up in my level of ambition. Yeah. Definitely. And if I'm not like feeding myself and nourishing myself and take, like being mindful of those distractions that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. That's like the essential part to being an artist, I think, is you really have to keep going to the well, keep refilling the well, and finding ways to nourish yourself. It's like a responsibility that you have to yourself. You have to take it seriously, because if you don't, it's like all the great ideas in the world don't mean anything if you don't have the inspiration to make them manifest in this three-dimensional reality that we live in.
Yeah.
They'll just hang out in the ethers as ideas. And everyone I know has a book idea.
Yeah, I know, right?
I've got one.
Me too.
I've got a few.
Got a half-started one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's. I'm so glad you said that. That's actually like a question I ask a lot of my guests, like directly, is like, where do you find inspiration, or like, what do you believe inspiration is?
Yeah.
And few people really have an answer for it, and I wouldn't have an answer for it necessarily either. But having the discipline, and you know what you need. Self-care is a very good way to put it, I think, because if you're out partying all the time and running yourself thin and not taking care of yourself, and sure, you can exist in that place. And I know people who do full time and still make music, and like, I don't really have an answer for that. They do it, but they have their own well that they're going to. I promise you, whatever it is, and we all have to have, at least a course of action that we take. That we can follow through and say, like, all right, I just need, I need to get out into nature, or I need to go to a show. I need to go hang out with some other artists, whatever it is. I need to meditate. Like, I need to do some yoga. You got to have the discipline to actually do that, because it's so easy, like you said, have that book idea, and like, oh, I have this great, brilliant idea, and oh man, it's going to be good. Everyone's going to love it. But if you don't have the discipline to sit your ass in a chair and write it down, it's going to float away. That's just how it goes. And anyone who's ever undertaken any kind of serious creative endeavor knows the pain of that.
Yeah, I mean, it requires an ethic, work ethic, a strong one, to do the big things in this world. I feel like it's the difference between those who do and those who don't are the ones who are willing to work their asses off. And I think of, and then, like you're saying, your friends or people who go out to the bar all night, and their music probably reflects that, though.
Very much.
That's probably what their music's about.
Yeah.
But if you want to make something that's like, in the specific hemisphere of music that I like, can't be partying.
Yeah.
You have to, and I think of it as a process of like sensitization.
Yeah.
Like, you have to stay acutely sensitive, keep the mind soft enough to where you can still be penetrated by the beauty of the world around you.
Yeah.
I was at a men's gathering a couple nights ago, and we're all sitting around the fire, and we're in this majestic place. The wood thrush is singing in the trees, the fires of the stars are out. And I was like, am I really absorbing the beauty of this moment? And I checked in with myself, and I felt all the hard places in my body and in my mind, and I felt my tiredness in my eyes and everything. And I was like, okay, most of it's bouncing off me right now. And so I just softened and opened up, and brought myself here and as much as I could. And gradually I started to have the emotional connection with the beauty around me. And I think if I could point to one thing that's like the well, that's what it is you have to stay sensitized to the beauty of the world, and let it enrich you, let it penetrate you, let it nourish you, let it feed you, because that's, then that reflects in what you do.
Totally.
And you get energized by it. I mean, it gives you the inspiration. And for me, like nothing else, it gives me the inspiration to create. It makes me want to reflect that beauty back to the world, and to refract it through the lens of my being into new forms,
Totally.
So
that's a beautiful answer. And I do want to say that, like, there's nothing wrong with people pursuing their creative path and like drinking, partying, doing drugs, like whatever. That creativity is creativity, and if that's your path, that's your path. But that's not what we're talking about specifically. Yeah. I'm not knocking it. I got great people I love who are in that, but. And the other thing I wanted to say was that what you just said is like so perfectly ties into that Dogen quote that we were talking about when we were hanging out recently. Zen Master Dogen, he talks about like it's kind of an offhanded quote only because of what he says in it. And he says that the purpose of this practice, referring to meditation, says the purpose of this practice, if such a thing can even be conceived of, is a tender heart. And when I first heard that, from this like Zen master, like Dogen, this deep guy, and everything he wrote was like almost impossible to understand. But then you hear that, and he sums up the entirety of Zazen, the entirety of meditation, to be cultivating a tender heart. And what you just said, like sitting around the fire and like feeling these hard places and not connecting with the natural beauty that's right there is so prevalent in our world. And it's awesome to have that clear advice, you know, to have that as something that people can be like, oh, right. Yeah, this is amazing. How do I connect with it again, you know, and softening and just opening up to that tenderness, I think is huge.
Being a clear vessel to it, you know, to witness it from a place of clarity and embodiment. You know, it's like this, it has to be able to penetrate your body. You have to, you know, to feel it moving you, as opposed to being kind of separate and on your own course. You kind of let it run through you, let it channel through you like water, like a stream. And that's, you know, you invited me to be on this podcast because we both have the connection to music and to meditation. And, you know, that's why I think meditation is such an essential part of the kind of music that I like to make, at least. I'm not saying that what I do is the be all end all. Just an amazing, I mean, Jack Kerouac, you reference him, he drank himself to death. And he made something that inspired the hell out of me, you know.
Exactly.
There's no one way, but like the kind of specific world that I'm talking about is like very, it coexists and is completely dependent on and reference from the practice of meditation. They go hand in hand, because for me it requires sensitivity.
And you'd like to live into your 70s and 80s and beyond, and not die in like your 40s and 50s.
Who knows what he could have written? Had he stuck around?
So many greats.
And maybe the alcohol or whatever it was diminished his overall work. Maybe his books would have been far better. In fact, that's what what's the guy's name? Played in Cream, Eric Clapton. He said he used to think the drugs, you know, the heroin made him what he was, but then later he realized that he didn't realize his potential because of them. He could have made music way beyond that.
Even Coltrane, he had, you know, obviously was a heroin addict, and a lot of people started doing heroin because they wanted to play like Coltrane. And he even said, like, he was a deeply spiritual person. He was studying mysticism of the East way back when he was playing music, you know, playing free jazz and stuff. And he had that advice for people all the time. It's like, it's not the heroin. Like, you know, that's just a distraction. Like, don't let it fool you. Like, you know, sure, he had an addiction, but he even saw through that, you know. And I think the greats pretty much always in hindsight come back and say that. Like, that's more of a coping mechanism, I think, for fame, and for maybe for Coltrane it was just being like hard life. But still, it's not, it's clearly there's something deeper and something more essential that we all can connect with. We don't need those distractions, you know. And maybe they help people in some strange way.
I think they do.
I think they do too.
I think it can give someone a vision. You know, I know my psychedelic experiences have been essential to kind of,
for sure, slightly different than heroin, but
you know, what I saw was much different than what I actualized. Though you could see it, but then to actualize it is a whole different story. And it's like you know, like seeing the mountain. There's between seeing the mountain and actually climbing up and like living on it.
Absolutely.
You know, just to make it as pretentious and Eastern as possible.
Yeah, get it in there. We already referenced Doug and Kerouac, and we got in there, so it's very Asheville approved.
I read it in a fortune cookie, so it must be true.
Love it. Well, great, man. I think that's a really great place to wrap this up. I really appreciate your openness with all this, and just, you know, the relaxed vibe of this room and the rain and the kitties in the bed there, and it's great, man. I really do get nourished from this, so many thanks for joining me today. And
it's really sweet to connect, and just, you know, I feel like oftentimes I feel like I don't want to burden people with my passion with these sorts of things, so I don't often talk about it. But to meet a fellow mind who's just like, you know, so excited and on fire for this part of being alive, you know, it's just a real blessing to be able to have that conversation and connection and friendship.
Totally, man.
So
it's my selfish way of getting through that. I can't talk about it either. So when I meet those people and then I have a conversation, you know, and others listen. But thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you all for listening. We will catch you next time.